In 1862 Texas territory, Clara Whitmore scrapes by on society's discarded stale bread until a kind Irish baker offers her something no one else would: fresh loaves and a chance at dignity. But when the town's respectable citizens discover Thomas Brennan's generosity toward the unwanted girl, will his compassionate heart be enough to protect them both from a community determined to keep her in her place? A rat scurried across Clara's bare foot as she dug through the trash pile behind Miller's General Store. The September morning air in Millfield, Texas territory bit at her skin like tiny needles. Her stomach twisted with hunger so sharp it felt like someone was squeezing her insides with cold hands. 3 pieces of bread lay scattered among the potato peels and coffee grounds. She grabbed them quickly, brushing off the dirt and mold spots. The bread felt hard as rocks in her shaking fingers. Clara stuffed the pieces into the torn pocket of her worn dress before anyone could see her. "Get away from there, you dirty girl." Mrs. Miller's voice cracked like a whip from the store's back door. The woman's face looked mean and pinched, like she'd been sucking on sour lemons. "We don't want your kind around here." Clara's cheeks burned with shame, but she didn't run. She couldn't afford to run. This trash pile had kept her alive for 2 weeks since she'd lost the old barn where she used to sleep. The barn owner had chased her off with a pitchfork, screaming about property values and decent folks. "Please, ma'am," Clara said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "I was just cleaning up the mess, making it tidy for you." Mrs. Miller's eyes got smaller and meaner. "Don't you lie to me, Clara Whitmore. Everyone knows what you really are. A burden. A reminder of failure." She grabbed a wooden spoon from her apron and waved it at Clara like a weapon. "Your parents couldn't even keep their farm, and now look at you, digging through garbage like some wild animal." The words hit Clara harder than any physical blow could have. Her parents had died trying to save their farm. The fever had taken them both within a week, leaving Clara with nothing but memories and a pile of debts she couldn't understand. "My parents were good people," Clara managed to say, though her voice shook like autumn leaves in the wind. "Good people don't lose everything," Mrs. Miller snapped back. "Good people find ways to survive without begging and stealing." Clara wanted to tell her about the long nights when her father coughed blood into his handkerchief. She wanted to explain how her mother had given away their last flour to the neighboring family whose baby was sick. But the words stuck in her throat like dry breadcrumbs. Instead, she turned and walked away, her head held as high as she could manage. Behind her, Mrs. Miller kept shouting about worthless girls and the decline of proper society. Clara had heard it all before, from different mouths in different places around town. The main street of Millfield stretched before her like a river she couldn't cross. On one side stood the nice houses with painted fences and flower gardens. Those belonged to the bank owner, the preacher, and the families who had money in their pockets and food on their tables. On the other side sat the smaller buildings where working folks lived, the blacksmith, the seamstress, and others who earned their keep with dirty hands and tired backs. Clara belonged to neither side anymore. She existed in the spaces between the alleyways, the abandoned buildings, the forgotten corners where nobody looked too closely. As she walked, she noticed how people crossed the street when they saw her coming. Mothers pulled their children closer and whispered warnings about staying away from that Whitmore girl. Men tipped their hats to each other but looked right through Clara as if she were made of air. The hunger in her belly grew stronger with each step. She found a quiet spot behind the church and pulled out one of the bread pieces. It felt so hard she worried it might break her teeth. She dipped it in water from the horse trough to soften it up, then forced herself to chew slowly. The taste was bitter and moldy, but it was food. Sitting there in the shadow of the church, Clara remembered Sunday mornings when her family would dress in their best clothes and sit in the third pew from the front. Reverend Morse would preach about loving your neighbor and helping those in need. Now the same man crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. A group of children ran past, laughing and chasing each other in a game of tag. Clara watched them with a hollow feeling in her chest. She remembered being their age, when the biggest worry was whether it would rain on the day of the church picnic. Now she worried about where she'd sleep when winter came, and whether she'd find enough food to keep from starving. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and Clara knew she needed to move again. Staying in one place too long drew attention, and attention usually meant trouble. She had learned to become invisible, to slip through the town like a shadow that nobody noticed. But as she stood up and brushed the dust from her skirt, something caught her eye. Down the street, a thin trail of white smoke rose from a chimney she'd never noticed before. The smoke carried a smell that made her mouth water and her heart pound with something that might have been hope. It smelled like fresh bread. "Jamie Crawford, you get back here right now." The angry voice echoed through the alley as a small boy with sandy hair burst around the corner, running like his life depended on it. The boy couldn't have been more than 12 years old, but his eyes held the careful look of someone much older. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and a fresh bruise darkened his left cheek. He clutched a small cloth bundle against his chest as he ran. Clara pressed herself against the brick wall, hoping to stay hidden, but the boy spotted her immediately. He slowed down, breathing hard, and looked over his shoulder with fear written all over his face. "Please don't tell him which way I went," Jamie gasped, his words coming out in short bursts. "He's real mad this time, madder than usual." Before Clara could ask who he was, heavy footsteps thundered down the alley. A tall man with a red face and mean eyes came stomping around the corner. His clothes smelled like whiskey and sweat, and his hands were clenched into fists. "Where is that worthless boy?" the man shouted, looking right at Clara. "I know you've seen him, girl. Don't you try to protect him?" Clara's heart raced, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "I haven't seen any boy, mister. I've just been sitting here minding my own business." The man's eyes got narrow and dangerous. "You're lying. I can always tell when people are lying to me." He took a step closer, and Clara could smell the alcohol on his breath. "That boy stole something from me, and I'm going to make him pay for it." "I really haven't seen anyone," Clara repeated, though her voice shook a little. She could hear the boy's quick breathing from somewhere behind a pile of wooden crates, but she kept her eyes on the angry man. After what felt like forever, the man spat on the ground near Clara's feet and stomped away, muttering angry words under his breath. Clara waited until his footsteps faded completely before she whispered to the hiding boy, "He's gone now. You can come out." Jamie crawled out from behind the crates, his face pale but grateful. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That was my pa. He gets real mean when he's been drinking, which is most days lately." Clara looked at the bruise on the boy's face and felt her stomach twist with something other than hunger. She knew what it was like to be unwanted, but at least her parents had loved her before they died. This boy was living with someone who hurt him on purpose. "What did you take from him?" she asked gently. Jamie opened the cloth bundle, revealing a small loaf of bread and 2 rolls. "I didn't steal nothing," he said firmly. "Mr. Brennan gave these to me for helping him this morning. I've been working at the bakery for a few weeks now, learning the trade. Pa thinks any money or food I get belongs to him." "Mr. Brennan?" Clara's ears perked up. She remembered the wonderful smell of fresh bread she'd noticed earlier. "Thomas Brennan. He's got a bakery just around the corner." Jamie's whole face changed when he talked about the baker. The fear left his eyes, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. "He's real kind, not like most grown-ups. He actually listens when I talk, and he's teaching me how to make proper bread." Jamie looked at Clara more carefully, taking in her torn dress and too thin face. "You look hungry," he said, echoing words someone else had apparently spoken to him recently. "Want to share this bread? Mr. Brennan always gives me more than I can eat by myself." Clara's pride wanted her to say no. She'd been turned away from so many doors, rejected by so many people, that accepting help felt dangerous. But her empty stomach had its own voice, and it was louder than her pride. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I don't want to take your food." "I'm sure," Jamie said, breaking one of the rolls in half and offering her the larger piece. "Besides, Mr. Brennan says food tastes better when you share it with someone who needs it." The bread was still warm and softer than anything Clara had tasted in months. It practically melted in her mouth, and she had to force herself not to eat it too quickly. Real food after weeks of scraps and garbage, it felt like a miracle. "This Mr. Brennan," Clara said between small bites. "He sounds different from most folks around here." Jamie nodded eagerly. "He is different. He came here from Ireland about a year ago with nothing but some family recipes and a dream of starting over. People weren't very welcoming at first. You know how they are about outsiders. But his bread is so good that even the meanest customers can't stay mad at him." As they shared the food, Jamie told Clara about the bakery, how Mr. Brennan got up before dawn every morning to start the ovens, how he knew exactly when each loaf was ready just by the sound it made when he tapped it, how he sometimes hummed Irish songs while he worked, filling the whole shop with music and warmth. "He needs more help," Jamie continued, his voice getting excited. "The business is growing, and he can't do everything himself. Maybe you could ask him for work?" Clara almost choked on her bread. "Me? Work in a real bakery?" The idea seemed impossible. "Jamie, nobody in this town wants to hire me. I'm just the Whitmore girl who lost everything." "Mr. Brennan isn't like nobody," Jamie said firmly. "He judges people by what they do, not what other people say about them. Besides, he told me just yesterday that he needed someone with gentle hands to help with the delicate pastries." As if summoned by their conversation, the smell of fresh bread grew stronger. Somewhere nearby, a door opened and closed, and Clara could hear the faint sound of someone whistling a cheerful tune. "That's him," Jamie whispered, his eyes lighting up. "Mr. Brennan always whistles when he's happy about how the morning's baking turned out." Clara felt something flutter in her chest, a feeling she'd almost forgotten how to name. It might have been hope, or it might have been fear. Maybe it was both at the same time. But as the scent of fresh bread wrapped around her like a warm blanket, she found herself wondering if Jamie might be right. Maybe some people really were different. Clara's stomach twisted as the bakery door swung open with a cheerful bell. The Irish man stood there holding a golden roll that steamed in the cool morning air, and she wanted to run faster than a spooked horse. "I haven't any money," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other like rocks down a hill. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her worn dress. 3 months of scraping by had taught her that nothing good came without a price she couldn't pay. The baker, Thomas, she remembered, stepped aside and motioned her into his warm shop. "Did I ask for money, lass?" Clara's bare feet hesitated on the wooden step. The bakery smelled like heaven might smell. Yeast bubbling, butter melting, something sweet baking in the big stone oven that glowed like a friendly giant in the corner. Shelves lined the walls, holding more bread than she'd seen in one place since before her parents died. "Come in out of the cold," Thomas said gently. "You're shivering." She was shivering, though she hadn't noticed. The September morning bit through her thin shawl like winter teeth. Clara took one careful step inside, then another, ready to bolt if this kindness turned into something else. Thomas moved behind his wooden counter and began wrapping several rolls in brown paper. His hands worked quickly, like he'd done this 1,000 times. "What's your name?" he asked, not looking up from his task. "Clara Whitmore." The words felt strange in her mouth. When had someone last cared what she was called? Clara. He said it like he was tasting something good. "That's a fine name. Irish, like my grandmother's." The first roll broke apart in her fingers, releasing a cloud of steam that made her eyes water. Or maybe the tears came from somewhere else, from the shock of bread that was soft inside, that didn't fight her teeth or taste like sadness. "How long since you've eaten something fresh?" Thomas asked. Clara swallowed the wonderful mouthful before answering. "I don't remember." Thomas stopped wrapping and really looked at her then. His brown eyes held no pity, just a kind of understanding that made her chest tight. "Well, that's too long by any measure." A sound from the back room made Clara jump footsteps and the scrape of something heavy being moved. "Is someone else here?" she whispered. "Just my young helper," Thomas said, Boy named Jamie. He's cleaning the big mixing bowls." He handed her the package of wrapped rolls. "These are yours, Clara Whitmore. And if you'd like, there will be more tomorrow." Clara stared at the brown paper bundle. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Thomas wiped his flour-covered hands on his apron. "My mother used to say that bread was meant to be shared, that keeping it all to yourself made it taste like dust." Through the front window, Clara could see people walking past on the dusty street. Mrs. Henley from the general store glanced through the glass, and her face twisted like she'd bitten into something sour. The woman nudged her daughter and pointed at Clara with a sharp finger. "They don't like me being here," Clara said quietly. Thomas followed her gaze, and his jaw tightened slightly. Some folks have forgotten what it means to be neighbors. A boy about 12 years old peeked around the corner from the back room. His red hair stuck up in all directions, and flour dotted his freckled cheeks. When he saw Clara, he didn't look away like most people did. Instead, he gave her a small, careful smile. "That's Jamie," Thomas said. "Jamie, come meet Clara." The boy approached slowly, wiping his wet hands on a rag. "Hello," he said simply. "Hello," Clara replied, surprised by how normal the word sounded. Jamie looked at the rolls in her hands, then at Thomas. Something passed between them, a look Clara couldn't quite read. The boy nodded slightly, as if agreeing to something unspoken. "I should go," Clara said, clutching the warm package against her chest. The kindness felt too big, too bright, like staring at the sun. It hurt, even though it was good. "Of course," Thomas said. "But Clara, the offer stands. Tomorrow morning, if you'd like. Fresh bread, made before dawn." Clara backed toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Why would you do that?" Thomas smiled, and it changed his whole face. "Because everyone deserves fresh bread, lass. Everyone." Outside, the wind picked up, swirling dust down the street. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, moving in faster than they should for September. Clara hurried toward the old mill where she'd been sleeping, but she could feel eyes watching her from windows and doorways. At the general store, Mrs. Henley stood with 3 other women, their heads bent together like buzzards over something dead. Clara caught pieces of their whispered words as she passed. "That Irish baker," encouraging her. "What will people think?" The bread in her arm stayed warm even as the first cold drops of rain began to fall. Clara pressed the package closer and walked faster. Behind her, she didn't see Jamie Crawford slip out the bakery's back door and follow at a distance, his young face serious with purpose. But she did hear Mrs. Henley's voice rise above the others. "Someone needs to put a stop to this before it goes too far." The rain started in earnest then, washing the dust from the street and sending everyone scurrying for cover. Clara ran the last few yards to the mill, her heart full of fresh bread and new fear in equal measure. The crash of breaking glass shattered the morning quiet as Clara stumbled backward from the bakery window, her heart hammering like a frightened bird. Blood dripped from her knuckle, where the sharp edge had caught her, but the pain felt distant compared to the shame burning her cheeks. She'd been watching Thomas work again, lost in the peaceful rhythm of his hands, shaping dough, when Mrs. Henley appeared behind her like a vengeful shadow. "Spying on decent folk now, are we?" the older woman hissed, her bony fingers digging into Clara's shoulder. "Haven't you caused enough trouble?" The bakery door flew open, and Thomas appeared, his flour-dusted apron flapping as he rushed toward them. His eyes took in the broken glass, Clara's bleeding hand, and Mrs. Henley's twisted expression in one swift glance. "What happened here?" His voice carried an edge Clara had never heard before. Mrs. Henley lifted her chin, smoothing her skirts with practiced dignity. "This person was lurking outside your establishment like a common thief. I merely startled her." "She pushed me!" The words burst from Clara before she could stop them. Then immediately she wished she could take them back. Decent girls didn't accuse their betters of violence, even when it was true. Thomas stepped between them, his broad shoulders blocking Mrs. Henley's view of Clara. "Mrs. Henley, I think you should leave." I think you should be more careful about the company you keep, Mr. Brennan. The woman's voice dripped poison. Birds of a feather, as they say. After she swept away in a rustle of righteous indignation, Thomas turned to Clara with gentle concern. Let me see that hand. Inside the warm bakery, he cleaned her cut with careful fingers while Jamie watched from behind the counter, his young face tight with worry. The boy had been coming around more often lately, drawn by the kindness that seemed to flow from Thomas like heat from his ovens. She's going to make trouble for you, Clara whispered, wincing as Thomas wrapped her knuckle in clean cloth. Because of me. Let me worry about Mrs. Henley, Thomas replied, but Clara caught the flicker of concern in his eyes. Jamie, would you mind the shop? I want to show Clara something. He led her through a narrow door behind the ovens into a small room she'd never seen before. Shelves lined the walls, filled with notebooks covered in careful handwriting. The air smelled of ink and dreams. These are my recipes, Thomas explained, pulling down a leather-bound journal. Every loaf I've ever perfected, every technique I've learned, my life's work. Clara's fingers trembled as she touched the pages, seeing measurements and notes written in Thomas's neat script. Why are you showing me this? Because I want to teach you. The words hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Not just how to eat bread, Clara, how to make it. The idea seemed impossible, wonderful, terrifying. People like me don't become bakers. People like you become whatever they choose to become. Thomas pulled out a stool and gestured for her to sit. The question is, what do you choose? Before Clara could answer, Jamie burst through the door, his face pale with excitement and fear. Mr. Brennan, come quick! There's a man outside asking questions about Clara. He's got a badge. Through the front window, they could see a tall stranger in a dusty coat talking to several townspeople. His silver star caught the morning light as he gestured toward the bakery. Sheriff Daniels from Silver Creek, Thomas murmured, recognition dawning in his voice. What could he want here? Clara's blood turned to ice water. Silver Creek was where she'd lived before coming to Millfield, where her parents had died, where debts still lingered like ghosts. He's come for me, she whispered. I knew this day would come. The sheriff approached the bakery with slow, measured steps, and Clara found herself pressed against Thomas's side, drawing strength from his steady presence. Whatever faced them outside, she wouldn't run anymore. Through the glass, Sheriff Daniels raised his hand in greeting, his weathered face unreadable. The moment of truth had arrived faster than any of them expected. Jamie grabbed Clara's free hand, his small fingers intertwining with hers. Whatever happens, the boy said with fierce loyalty, we stick together. Thomas nodded, squaring his shoulders as he moved toward the door. Together, he agreed, and Clara felt something precious and fragile unfurling in her chest, the dangerous, wonderful feeling of belonging somewhere. The sheriff stepped inside, bringing the scent of leather and long roads with him. His eyes found Clara immediately, and she braced herself for the words that would shatter this brief glimpse of happiness. But when Sheriff Daniels spoke, his voice held unexpected gentleness. Miss Whitmore? I've been looking for you for quite some time. There's something you need to know about your parents' death. The floor seemed to shift beneath Clara's feet. All this time, she'd thought she understood her story. Now, standing in the warm bakery surrounded by people who cared about her, she realized her real story might just be beginning. The sheriff's next words would change everything, and Clara gripped Thomas's hand tighter, preparing for whatever truth awaited her. Your father was murdered. The words hit Clara like a physical blow, driving the breath from her lungs as the bakery suddenly felt too small, too hot, too real. Sheriff Daniels stood in the doorway like an angel of terrible news, his badge catching the morning light as he delivered the revelation that shattered everything Clara thought she knew about her past. That's impossible, she gasped, her legs giving way until Thomas caught her, his strong arms the only thing keeping her upright. The fever took them both. Everyone said so. Sheriff Daniels removed his hat, running weathered fingers through graying hair. The fever took your mother, that much is true. But your father. Someone wanted Martin Whitmore dead, and they made sure it looked natural. Jamie pressed closer to Clara's other side, his young face pale with shock. Outside, curious townspeople began gathering at the windows, drawn by the sight of a lawman in their peaceful settlement. Who? The word tore from Clara's throat like broken glass. Who would hurt my father? That's what I've been trying to figure out for months. The sheriff accepted Thomas's offer of a chair, settling his bulk with a weary sigh. Your father came to me 3 days before he died, Miss Whitmore. Said he'd discovered something that could destroy several important men in Silver Creek. He was scared, real scared. The bakery door chimed as Mrs. Henley entered without invitation, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with obvious satisfaction. Sheriff Daniels, what a pleasant surprise. I do hope you're not here on unpleasant business. Clara felt Thomas's muscles tense beside her. Something cold and calculating flickered in Mrs. Henley's expression, and suddenly Clara understood that this woman's hatred ran deeper than simple social prejudice. Actually, Mrs. Henley, your timing is perfect. Sheriff Daniels stood slowly, his hand resting on his gun belt. I was hoping to speak with you about certain financial irregularities between Silver Creek and Millfield. The color drained from Mrs. Henley's face. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Land deals, mostly. Properties bought cheap from desperate families, then sold at considerable profit to railroad companies. Properties like the Whitmore farm. Clara's world tilted sideways. Her father hadn't just discovered corruption, he'd discovered his own family was being destroyed by it. The fever that killed her mother had been just the beginning of someone's larger plan. You're talking nonsense, Mrs. Henley snapped, but her voice shook with fear now, instead of authority. Martin Whitmore was a drunk who couldn't manage his affairs. My father never drank. Clara stood on trembling legs, fury giving her strength. He worked himself to death trying to save our farm. Worked himself to death is right, Sheriff Daniels said grimly. Poisoned with something that mimicked fever symptoms. Someone wanted him quiet, permanent, like. Through the window, Clara could see more people gathering. Reverend Morse, Mr. Peterson from the bank, several other prominent citizens. But instead of the usual curiosity, their faces showed something else. Fear. Jamie tugged on Thomas's sleeve. Mr. Brennan, the boy whispered urgently, my pa's coming, and he don't look happy. Sure enough, Crawford Sr. was pushing through the crowd, his face red with anger and something that might have been panic. Behind him came 3 other men Clara recognized as Mrs. Henley's usual companions at church social events. This is private business, Sheriff, Mrs. Henley said, backing toward the door. Perhaps we should discuss it elsewhere. Oh, I think right here is perfect. Sheriff Daniels blocked her path with casual authority. Especially since I have warrants for several people in this very room. The tension exploded like a struck match. Crawford burst through the door with violence in his eyes, followed by his accomplices. You should have kept your mouth shut, old man, he snarled at the sheriff. Clara found herself pressed between Thomas and Jamie as the bakery became a battleground. Thomas grabbed a rolling pin from the counter, while Sheriff Daniels drew his weapon. The peaceful space where Clara had learned to hope suddenly transformed into something dangerous and desperate. Nobody has to get hurt, the sheriff called out. But Crawford was beyond reasoning. The man lunged forward with a knife appearing in his hand like deadly magic. It was Jamie who changed everything. The boy threw himself between his father and the sheriff with a cry of desperate courage, catching Crawford's wrist as the blade swept downward. Father and son crashed into the flour barrels in a tangle of fury and betrayal. Run, Clara! Thomas shouted, pushing her toward the back door. Get out of here! But Clara had spent too many months running, too many years being afraid. This was her fight now, her chance to face the truth that had been hunting her since her parents died. Instead of fleeing, she grabbed the sheriff's backup pistol from his belt and pointed it at Mrs. Henley with shaking hands. Tell me why, she screamed over the chaos. Tell me why my father had to die. Mrs. Henley's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Because he was going to ruin everything. The railroad money, the land deals, all of it. We worked too hard building this empire to let some nobody farmer destroy it. The confession hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger as fury and grief warred in her heart. One squeeze, and her father's murderer would pay the price justice demanded. But Thomas's voice cut through her rage like a lifeline. Clara, don't. You're better than they are. Don't let them turn you into something you're not. The gun wavered in her grip as Clara stared into Mrs. Henley's terrified eyes. This was the moment that would define who she truly was. Would she choose vengeance or justice? Would she become the person her father raised her to be, or let his killers drag her down to their level? The choice balanced on a knife's edge, and the entire room held its breath. Mrs. Henley pressed her nose against the cold window glass, watching the men march away from the bakery like soldiers after a battle. Her heart beat fast with excitement. Finally, someone had told that Irish baker the truth about his foolish kindness. "Did they make him stop, Mother?" Emily asked from behind her chair. "Hush now," Mrs. Henley snapped, but her voice carried satisfaction thick as honey. "Good things take time to grow, just like weeds take time to pull." Across the street, she could see Thomas Brennan through his bakery window. His shoulders looked stiff, angry. His hands moved too quickly as he kneaded the bread dough, punching it harder than needed. Mrs. Henley smiled. Men always thought they were so strong, so sure of themselves, but they broke just like everyone else when enough pressure found the right spot. Emily moved closer to the window. "He looks upset." "He looks like a man learning his place," her mother corrected. "Some lessons hurt more than others." But Emily's young eyes saw something different. She watched Thomas wipe flour from his hands with shaking fingers. She saw him look toward the door, waiting. His face held the kind of sadness that came when good people realized the world could be cruel to kindness. "Where do you think Clara is now?" Emily whispered. Mrs. Henley's back went straight as a board. "That girl is exactly where she belongs, away from decent folk who work hard for what they have." Down the street, old Mr. Patterson from the bank walked with quick, nervous steps. He kept looking over his shoulder like someone might be following him. Mrs. Henley had heard the whispers about money going missing from the poor fund. Strange how everyone seemed to have forgotten about that problem once Clara Whitmore became the town's new target. "I saw her help Mrs. Cooper carry her groceries last week," Emily said quietly. "Clara did. She didn't ask for anything back." "You saw wrong." Mrs. Henley's voice cut sharp as winter wind. "Girls like that don't help anyone but themselves." But Emily remembered Clara's gentle hand steadying the old woman. She remembered the soft smile Clara had given when Mrs. Cooper thanked her. Those memories didn't match the terrible picture her mother painted with words. Outside, young Jamie Crawford ran past their window, his face red from running. He carried something pressed tight against his chest, a book or papers of some kind. The boy looked scared, like he carried secrets too big for someone so small. "That Crawford boy spends too much time at the bakery," Mrs. Henley observed. "His father should put a stop to it." "Maybe he likes learning to bake," Emily suggested. "Maybe he likes avoiding his chores," her mother replied coldly. But Emily had seen Jamie's bruises. She knew why the boy spent long hours anywhere but home. Some fathers loved their children. Others seemed to see them as mistakes that needed fixing with angry words and hard hands. The afternoon sun began to fade, painting the street in gold and shadow. Mrs. Henley watched Thomas close his bakery early, something he never did. He walked with slow steps toward the edge of town, carrying a cloth bundle that probably held food. "He's going to find her," Emily realized. "He's making his choice," Mrs. Henley said, "and choices have results." Emily pressed her small hand against the window glass. The cold seeped through, making her fingers ache. She thought about Clara sleeping somewhere, without warmth, without a real roof over her head. She thought about Thomas risking everything he'd built just to be kind to someone the town had decided to throw away. "What if we're wrong about her, Mother?" Mrs. Henley turned from the window, her eyes hard as river stones. "Wrong? Child, some people are born to struggle. That's the natural way of things. Clara Whitmore lost her family, lost her home, lost her place in this community. Those aren't accidents. That's God showing us who deserves what. But nothing. Mrs. Henley's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more frightening than shouting. That girl brings bad luck wherever she goes. First, her parents died. Then their farm failed. Now she's trying to ruin a good man's business. Can't you see the pattern? Emily stared at her mother's reflection in the window glass. The face looking back seemed like a stranger's, cold and certain, in a way that made Emily's stomach feel sick. I think she's just hungry, Emily said. Hunger is a choice, Mrs. Henley replied. There are always ways to earn food if you're willing to work hard enough. But Emily remembered the jobs Clara had tried to find. Every door closed, every opportunity given to someone else. The girl had knocked on their own door just last month, asking if they needed help with washing or mending. Mrs. Henley had slammed the door without even listening to the offer. As darkness crept across the town, Emily made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, when her mother went to visit her sister, Emily would find Clara Whitmore. She would learn the truth with her own eyes, instead of believing someone else's words. The choice felt scary and exciting at the same time, like standing at the edge of a creek deciding whether to jump across to the other side. Thomas found Clara sitting by the old mill wheel, her thin arms wrapped around her knees like she was trying to hold herself together. The sight hit him harder than any angry words the town council could throw. Here was someone who should have been safe and warm, reduced to hiding by a creek because people feared what they didn't understand. "Clara?" he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. "You shouldn't be here, Thomas. People will talk." "People already talk." He sat down beside her on the old wooden beam, feeling it sag slightly under their combined weight. "Seems like they've been saving up conversation about us for quite some time." The evening air carried the smell of autumn leaves and creek water. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called out, lonely and clear. Clara pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, and Thomas noticed how the fabric had been mended many times with different colored thread. "They want you to stop helping me," she said, staring at the water flowing past their feet. "They want many things they can't have." Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out the cloth bundle he'd brought. Inside were 2 fresh rolls, still warm from the oven, and a small jar of honey. Being hungry isn't one of them. Clara's hands shook slightly as she accepted the food. "Why do you do this? Really? Everyone else sees something broken when they look at me. What do you see?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching moonlight dance on the moving water. "I see someone who says thank you every time, even when she doesn't have to. Someone who feeds stray cats when she barely has enough for herself. Someone who helped Jamie Crawford learn to read because she noticed he was struggling. You know about that? Jamie told me. He also told me how you've been teaching him numbers so he can help his mother with shopping when his father spends the money on drink." Clara's cheeks turned pink even in the dim light. "That's nothing special. Just being decent." "Being decent is everything special." Thomas shifted closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "My mother used to say that how we treat people when no one's watching shows who we really are inside." "What was she like?" "Your mother?" Thomas smiled, the memory warming his voice. "Strong, stubborn. She came from Ireland with nothing but determination and a rolling pin that had belonged to her grandmother. Built a life from flour and hope." He reached into his coat again, this time bringing out something wrapped in soft cloth. Clara watched with growing curiosity as he unwrapped a small wooden rolling pin, its surface smooth and dark from years of use. "This was hers," he said, placing it carefully in Clara's hands. "She made bread that could heal broken hearts and fill empty stomachs. Said the secret ingredient was always love." Clara ran her fingers over the worn wood, feeling the indentations left by countless hours of rolling dough. "I can't take this. It's too important." It belongs with someone who understands what it means. Thomas covered her hands with his own, warm and steady. Someone who knows that feeding people is about more than just stopping hunger. The mill wheel creaked softly in the breeze, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Thomas, I'm scared. Of what? Of believing this is real, of thinking someone could actually care about me that way. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. What if you change your mind? What if you decide they're right about me? Thomas was quiet for so long that Clara began to worry she'd said something wrong. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, carefully chosen. When I was 12, my father died in a mill accident back in Boston. Suddenly, my mother and I had nothing. No money, no relatives to help, nowhere to go. The church ladies brought us their leftover food, stale bread, soup that had gone cold, whatever they didn't want to waste. He paused, his thumb tracing circles on Clara's knuckles. One day, Mrs. O'Brien from down the street brought us a whole fresh loaf, still warm. When I asked her why, she said, "Because everyone deserves fresh bread, Thomas. Everyone deserves to know someone thinks they're worth the best we can give." Clara felt tears building behind her eyes. What happened then? My mother and I worked hard. She took in washing. I delivered papers. We saved every penny. Eventually, we had enough to buy our own place. But I never forgot that loaf of bread. How it tasted like hope when hope seemed impossible. The rolling pin felt heavier in Clara's hands now, weighted with story and meaning. Is that why you became a baker? Part of it, Thomas smiled. But mostly because I learned that making good things for people, really good things, is the best way to fight against all the ugliness in the world. A fish jumped in the creek, sending ripples across the moonlight. Clara watched the circles spread outward until they disappeared into darkness. The town council won't give up, she said. They'll keep pushing until you have to choose between helping me and keeping your business. Then I'll choose you. The words came out simple and sure, like he'd already thought it through completely, every time. Clara turned to look at him directly. You don't even know me. Not really. We've talked for maybe an hour total in all these weeks. I know enough. Thomas reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. I know you're brave enough to keep going when most people would have given up. I know you're kind even when the world isn't kind back. I know you make me want to be better than I was before I met you. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Clara felt her heart beating faster, not from fear this time, but from something that felt dangerously like hope. What happens now? She asked. Thomas stood up and offered her his hand. Now we go make some bread together. I want to teach you my mother's recipe for hope. A loud crash woke Jamie Crawford from his sleep behind the bakery ovens. His father stood in their tiny room, throwing clothes into a bag while 3 other men waited by the door. Jamie's heart started beating fast. He knew that look on his father's face, the same look he got before hitting someone. Pack your things, boy, his father said without looking at him. We're leaving town tonight. Jamie sat up on his thin blanket. Why? What happened? That baker friend of yours has gone too far. His father's voice was mean and cold. Feeding that worthless girl, making us all look bad. Some things need fixing. The men by the door laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Jamie saw the rope in one man's hands and felt sick to his stomach. He had heard stories about what happened to people the town didn't want. Bad stories that ended with someone getting hurt or worse. She didn't do nothing wrong, Jamie said quietly. His father spun around so fast that Jamie jumped. What did you say? Clara never hurt nobody. She just takes the food Mr. Brennan gives her. You defending that trash? His father's hand moved toward his belt. Maybe I need to teach you better. I'm sorry to interrupt you right here, but if you're enjoying this story thus far, please consider to subscribe to our channel so that you can enjoy so many more in the future. And by the way, don't hesitate to like the video as well, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Now enjoy the rest of the story. Jamie scrambled backwards until his back hit the wall. His father had taught him many lessons with his fists, and each one hurt more than the last. But something felt different this time, more dangerous. "Listen here, boy," his father said, coming closer. "That girl is bad luck. She's the reason crops failed, the reason the bank took the Johnson farm, the reason everything's going wrong in this town." Jamie wanted to say that Clara couldn't control the weather or the bank. He wanted to say that she was just hungry and sad and trying to stay alive. But the words stuck in his throat like dry bread. "We're going to fix the problem tonight," one of the other men said. "Clean up this town proper." "What are you going to do?" Jamie asked, even though he was scared to know. His father smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made Jamie want to hide. "We're going to have a talk with her. Make her understand that she needs to move on. Find somewhere else to be." Jamie knew his father was lying. The rope meant more than talking. The way the men kept looking at each other meant something terrible was coming. After the men left, Jamie sat in the dark room, thinking hard. He could stay quiet and safe like always. He could pretend he didn't know what was going to happen. He could let Clara face whatever came without any warning. Or he could do something brave for the first time in his life. The moon was high when Jamie slipped out of the bakery. He knew where Clara slept, the old mill by the creek where the wheel used to turn. Everyone in town knew, but most people pretended they didn't see her there. The walk felt longer than usual. Every shadow looked like his father. Every sound made him think someone was following him. His hands shook as he walked, and not just from the cold night air. When he got to the mill, he found Clara sitting by a small fire, reading an old book. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her face showed surprise. "Jamie, what are you doing here so late?" Jamie's words came out in a rush. "You have to leave. Tonight, my father and his friends are coming for you." Clara's face went white. "Coming for me? Why?" "They think you're the reason bad things happen in town. They got rope and angry faces. They're not coming to talk." Clara stood up fast, the book falling from her hands. "Where can I go? I don't have anywhere safe." Jamie thought quickly. "The cave by Eagle Rock. It's hidden and dry. You can stay there until they calm down." "What about you?" Clara asked. "Won't your father be mad that you warned me?" Jamie hadn't thought about that part. His father would be very mad. Madder than he had ever been before. But looking at Clara's scared face, Jamie knew he had made the right choice. "I'll be okay," he lied. "Just promise me you'll hide until it's safe." Clara grabbed her few things and put out the fire. "Thank you, Jamie. You're braver than you know." As she hurried toward the hills, Jamie felt proud and scared at the same time. He had done something good, something important, but he also knew that tomorrow would bring trouble like he had never seen before. He walked back to the bakery slowly, knowing that everything was about to change. The quiet night felt heavy with secrets and danger. Somewhere behind him, angry men were gathering. Somewhere ahead of him, punishment was waiting. But tonight, Clara would be safe. And sometimes, Jamie thought, that was enough to make being brave worth it. The bakery looked different when he got back. Darker somehow, like a place where bad things might happen. Jamie slipped inside and lay down on his blanket, but sleep wouldn't come. He stared at the ceiling and wondered if he had just saved Clara's life or made everything worse for everyone. Only tomorrow would tell him the answer to that question. The sound of breaking glass shattered the morning quiet, like thunder. Thomas Brennan dropped his rolling pin and ran toward the front of his bakery, where 6 angry men stood among the pieces of his window. Their faces were red with rage, and their hands were closed into fists. "Where is she?" Crawford shouted, his voice loud enough to wake the whole town. "Where's that girl you've been feeding?" Thomas stepped carefully around the broken glass, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to us, baker man." The man next to Crawford held a thick piece of wood like a weapon. "We know she comes here every day. We know you give her food and fill her head with ideas." "What ideas?" Thomas asked, though he already knew this wasn't really about ideas at all. "Ideas about being worth something," another man spat. ideas about deserving things she hasn't earned. Thomas felt anger growing hot in his chest. Every person deserves to eat. Not her kind, Crawford said. Not the kind that brings bad luck wherever they go. Behind the angry men, Thomas could see people gathering in the street. Some looked scared. Some looked excited, like they were watching a show. Mrs. Henley stood on her porch with a smile that made Thomas feel sick. "You need to tell us where she is," Crawford said, stepping closer. "And you need to stop helping her. Today." "No," Thomas said simply. The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Crawford's face got even redder, and the other men moved closer together, like wolves getting ready to attack. "No?" Crawford repeated, like he couldn't believe what he heard. "No," Thomas said again, louder this time. "I will not tell you where Clara is. I will not stop helping her. And I will not let you break my windows without answering for it." Crawford laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You think you can stop all of us? You think your Irish pride is stronger than 6 men with a purpose?" Thomas looked at each man's face, seeing the hate and fear that made them dangerous. "I think doing right is stronger than doing wrong, no matter how many people choose wrong." That's when Jamie appeared in the bakery doorway, his young face pale but determined. "Mr. Brennan's right," he said in a voice that shook only a little. "You're all wrong about Clara." Crawford spun around to face his son, his hand already moving to his belt. "Boy, you get back inside before I tan your hide." "No, Pa." Jamie stepped fully into the room, pieces of glass crunching under his feet. "I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of watching you hurt people who can't fight back." "You ungrateful little—" Crawford started toward Jamie, but Thomas moved faster. "Touch that boy, and you'll answer to me," Thomas said, putting himself between father and son. Crawford stopped, surprised by the iron in Thomas's voice. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was breathing and the whisper of wind through the broken window. Then Emily Henley's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Stop this right now." Everyone turned to see the young woman standing in the doorway, her mother behind her looking shocked and angry. Emily's hands were shaking, but her voice was strong. "Clara Whitmore never hurt any of you," Emily said. "She never asked for anything but kindness, and kindness is free." "Emily," Mrs. Henley hissed, "come away from there this instant." "No, Mother." Emily stepped into the bakery, her fancy shoes crunching on glass, just like Jamie's worn boots had. "Someone needs to tell the truth." Crawford looked confused now instead of just angry. "What truth?" Emily took a deep breath. "The truth about who's really been stealing from this town." The words hit the room like lightning. Thomas felt the change immediately. The way the angry men suddenly looked uncertain. The way Mrs. Henley's face went white as flour. "What are you talking about?" one of the men asked. Emily looked at Jamie, who nodded at her like they had planned this moment. "Show them," she said quietly. Jamie reached into his shirt and pulled out a leather book that looked old and worn. "I found this in my father's things," he said, holding it up so everyone could see. "It's got names and numbers. Money that was supposed to help people like Clara." Crawford lunged for the book, but Thomas caught his arm. "Let the boy speak." "He's lying," Crawford shouted. "That book doesn't mean nothing." But his voice sounded scared now instead of angry. And when people sound scared, Thomas knew it usually means they're hiding something true. Jamie opened the book with hands that barely shook at all. "It says here that the poor fund had $300 last month, but only $50 got given out. The rest went to—" He looked up at his father with sad eyes. "The rest went to you and your friends." The silence that followed was so complete that Thomas could hear his own heartbeat. Outside, the crowd had grown bigger, and everyone was listening to every word. "You've been stealing from the very people you claim to help," Emily said, her voice getting stronger with each word, "and blaming Clara for the problems you caused." That's when Thomas understood why these men had really come. They weren't angry about kindness or bad luck. They were scared about being caught. Emily Henley's heart hammered like a blacksmith's anvil as she watched the angry faces in the torchlight. The mob had Clara trapped against the old mill wall, and Thomas stood between them like a lone tree in a thunderstorm. Emily's mother gripped her arm so tight it hurt, whispering harsh words about staying away from trouble. But Emily couldn't stop thinking about last Tuesday. She had been walking by the creek when she saw Clara washing her only dress in the cold water. The girl looked so thin, so tired, like a bird with broken wings trying to fly. Emily had hidden behind the oak tree, watching Clara hang the wet dress on a branch and sit shivering in her thin chemise while it dried. That's when Emily knew the truth everyone refused to see. "She's not the problem," Emily whispered to herself, pulling away from her mother's grip. "We are." The torch flames danced across the angry men's faces as they shouted at Clara. Emily's stomach twisted like a rope being pulled tight. Her whole life, she had been taught that some people were better than others, that families like the Whitmores deserved their bad luck because they weren't strong enough or smart enough or good enough. But Clara had never hurt anyone. Emily's feet moved before her brain could stop them. She stepped forward into the circle of orange light, her voice shaking like autumn leaves. "Wait," she called out. "Please, just wait." Every head turned toward her. Her mother's face went white as fresh snow. "Emily!" Mrs. Henley hissed. "Get back here this instant." But Emily's courage grew stronger as she looked at Clara's frightened face. "She helped me," Emily said, her words coming faster now. "Last month, when I fell by the creek, she pulled me out and walked me home, never asked for anything in return." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it carried a deeper truth. Clara would have helped if Emily had needed it. That was the kind of person she was. "Emily, that's quite enough." Reverend Morse's voice boomed across the night. "You're confused, child. This woman is not worthy of your defense." "Why?" Emily shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. "Because she doesn't have money? Because her parents died? Because she's hungry?" Her mother stepped forward, face red with embarrassment. "Young lady, you will come home immediately." But Emily planted her feet like tree roots. Around her, she could feel the mob's anger starting to crack. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Peterson from the bank looked away when she stared at him. "I've watched you all," Emily continued, her young voice carrying across the water. "I've seen how you cross the street when Clara walks by. How you throw away good food rather than give it to someone who needs it. How you talk about Christian charity in church but turn your backs on someone who's actually suffering." Thomas stepped closer to Emily, his eyes shining with something like pride. "The girl speaks wisdom," he said softly. Crawford snarled and lunged forward. "Don't let a foolish child fill your head with nonsense, Brennan. The Whitmore girl is poison. Everyone knows it." "Everyone's wrong," Emily said firmly. She turned to face the crowd, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about angels walking among us, testing our kindness. What if Clara is one of those tests? What if God sent her here to see who among us would show mercy?" The silence that followed felt heavy as a thundercloud. Emily's mother grabbed her arm again, but gentler this time. "Emily, please. You don't understand the consequences of what you're saying." "I understand that consequences don't matter when someone's life is at stake," Emily replied. She looked at each face in the crowd, memorizing them. "I understand that years from now, we'll all have to live with what we choose to do tonight." Old Mr. Patterson, who owned the hardware store, lowered his torch slightly. "The girl's got a point," he muttered. "Ain't like Clara Whitmore ever stole anything or caused real trouble." "She's troubled just by existing," Crawford shouted, but his voice sounded less certain now. Emily saw her chance. "Mr. Crawford, when's the last time you missed a meal? When's the last time you slept outside in the cold? When's the last time someone looked at you like you were worth less than the dirt under their boots?" Crawford's face twisted with rage, but he had no answer. Emily turned back to Clara, who stood frozen behind Thomas like a cornered deer. I'm sorry, Emily said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry we made you feel invisible. I'm sorry we pretended you didn't matter. You do matter. Your life has value, just like everyone else's. Tears ran down Clara's cheeks, glinting like silver in the torchlight. This is ridiculous, Reverend Morse declared, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. We came here to solve a problem, not listen to a child's sentimental nonsense. Maybe the problem isn't what we thought it was, Emily said quietly. Her words hung in the air like smoke from the torches. Around the circle, Emily could see doubt creeping into faces that had been certain just minutes before. Some of the men began to shift their weight, looking uncomfortable. But just as Emily thought she might have changed their minds, a new voice cut through the night like a blade. I've got something to say that'll change everything. Everyone turned to see Jamie Crawford stepping out of the shadows, his young face pale but determined. In his hands, he clutched something that would shake the very foundations of everything they believed. Jamie Crawford's hands trembled as he held the leather journal against his chest. The boy had been running for what felt like hours, his breath coming in sharp gasps that made clouds in the cold night air. Behind him, the voices of the mob echoed across the mill yard, but Jamie knew he carried something more powerful than their anger. He had found the truth. I know why Clara's family really lost their farm, Jamie announced, his young voice cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. And it wasn't because they were weak or cursed or any of the lies you've been telling. His father, Crawford, spun around with fury blazing in his eyes. Boy, you get yourself home right now before I take a belt to your hide. But Jamie stepped forward instead of back, clutching the journal tighter. No, Pa, not this time. People need to hear this. Thomas moved protectively toward the boy. What do you have there, lad? Jamie's voice shook as he spoke, but his words came clear and strong. I found this hidden in Pa's room, under the loose floorboard where he keeps his whiskey money. It's got names in it. Dates. Money amounts. Things that'll make your blood run cold. Reverend Morse strode forward, his torch casting wild shadows across his pale face. Whatever mischief you think you've discovered, child, it has nothing to do with... It has everything to do with Clara, Jamie interrupted, opening the journal with fumbling fingers. Listen to this. Whitmore Farm Assessment, $200 diverted to personal use. Subject family unlikely to pursue legal action due to social standing. The silence that followed was so complete that Jamie could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Clara's face went white as birch bark. What? What does that mean? Jamie's voice cracked as he read more entries. Poor fund contributions, Mitchell family, $50 withheld. Henderson widow, $30 withheld. Reasons. Administrative costs. He looked up at the crowd with tears streaming down his cheeks. It means they stole from you. All of you. The money that was supposed to help poor families like Clara's, they took it for themselves. Crawford lunged for his son, but Thomas caught the man's thick wrist in a grip like iron. Let the boy finish, Thomas said, his Irish accent thick with controlled rage. Jamie stumbled backward, but kept reading. There's more. So much more. Convince bank to foreclose on Whitmore property early. Ensure quick sale to associates. Split profits 3 ways between Crawford, Morse, and Peterson. A gasp ran through the crowd like wind through wheat. Mr. Peterson's face turned red as a sunset. Now see here, that's your signature, isn't it, Mr. Peterson? Jamie held up a page covered in neat handwriting. Right there at the bottom of the agreement to buy the Whitmore land for half its value. Emily Henley stepped closer, her young face twisted with understanding and horror. You killed them? She whispered. Clara's parents died believing they were failures, but you killed them with your greed. They died of fever, Reverend Morse protested, but his voice sounded hollow now, like wind in an empty barrel. They died of despair, Clara said quietly, her voice growing stronger with each word. They died thinking they weren't good enough to keep their home, never knowing someone was stealing their chance at survival. Jamie flipped through more pages, his voice gaining confidence as he read. It's all here. How they took money meant for the church's charity fund. How they convinced the territorial governor that Millfield didn't need federal aid because the community was taking care of its own. How they divided up the profits from foreclosed farms among themselves. Old Mr. Patterson lowered his torch completely. His weathered face creased with shame. Good Lord, what have we done? We believed lies, Emily said firmly. We let ourselves think that Clara's suffering was natural instead of asking why it was happening. Crawford broke free from Thomas's grip and charged toward his son. You ungrateful little snake. After everything I've... Jamie dodged his father's reaching hands and ran to Clara's side. I'm sorry, he gasped. I'm so sorry. I heard Pa and his friends talking about it for months, but I was too scared to say anything. Too scared of what he'd do to me if I told. Clara knelt down to Jamie's level, her eyes gentle despite everything. You were just a child trying to survive, she said softly. Just like me. There's no shame in being afraid when you're powerless. Thomas stepped forward and placed his hand on Jamie's shoulder. But you found your courage when it mattered most, lad. That's what makes you a man. The crowd was beginning to fragment now, with some people backing away into the darkness, while others pressed closer to hear more of the journal's revelations. Reverend Morse's face had gone gray as old ashes. Even if these accusations were true, Morse stammered, it doesn't change the fact that this woman has no place in decent society. Decent society? Clara stood up slowly, the journal still open in Jamie's hands. You call yourselves decent? You stole food from hungry families. You stole hope from desperate people. You stole my parents' will to live and then blamed me for being orphaned. She turned to face the entire crowd, her voice ringing across the mill yard like a church bell. I may not have money, or fine clothes, or a fancy house, but I've never stolen from anyone. I've never lied to get what I wanted. I've never convinced myself that other people's suffering was acceptable as long as it benefited me. Emily began to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her thin shoulders. We're the ones who should be ashamed, she choked out. All of us. We're the ones who don't deserve to be part of decent society. Jamie nodded vigorously, wiping his nose on his sleeve. That's why I had to tell. That's why I couldn't keep quiet anymore. Because being scared isn't an excuse for letting evil win. Thomas pulled both Clara and Jamie into a protective embrace as the crowd began to dissolve around them. Some people slunk away into the night like shadows. Others stood rooted in place, staring at the journal that had revealed their community's rotten heart. But as the torches began to flicker and die, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The warm glow of truth finally spoken aloud. The real question now was what they would all choose to do with that truth. The leather journal felt heavy in Clara's hands, like it held the weight of every lie the town had ever told itself. Her fingers shook as she opened it under the flickering torchlight, knowing that whatever words lived on those pages would change everything forever. Listen to what really happened to my family, Clara said, her voice cutting through the night air like a sharp knife. The mob pressed closer, their angry faces now filled with something new fear of the truth. She read the first entry out loud. Whitmore Farm taxes raised by $50. Family cannot pay. Good for our plans. The words hung in the air like smoke from their torches. Thomas stepped closer to her side, his strong presence giving her courage. Jamie clutched his father's shirt, staring at the man he thought he knew. Even Emily held her breath, waiting to hear what came next. Crawford tried to grab the journal from Clara's hands. You little witch! Give me that! But Thomas caught his arm, holding him back with the strength that came from kneading bread every morning for years. Let her read, Thomas said firmly. His Irish accent made the words sound even stronger. Clara turned to the next page, her heart beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Sale of Whitmore cattle bought cheap when family desperate. Resold for double profit to Denver buyers. She looked up at the faces around her. My father sold his cattle for half what they were worth. Because you told him no one else would buy them. Mrs. Henley pushed through the crowd, her face white as fresh flour. This is ridiculous. That girl is making up stories. But Emily stepped between her mother and Clara, something fierce burning in her young eyes. Mother, stop. We all know the truth when we hear it. Reverend Morse's torch trembled in his hand. His voice came out small and broken. What have we done? What have we all done? Clara kept reading, each entry like a nail in the coffin of their lies. The journal showed how Crawford and his friends had cheated poor families for years. They made people desperate, then bought their land and belongings for almost nothing. The Whitmores were just the latest victims in a long line of theft disguised as charity. My parents died thinking they had failed, Clara said, her voice growing stronger with each word. They died believing they weren't good enough for this town. But the truth is, this town wasn't good enough for them. Old Mr. Peterson from the bank dropped his torch in the dirt, crushing it under his boot. We stole from the poor fund. We took money meant to help families like yours. His confession came out like water from a broken dam. The other men began backing away, their righteous anger turning into shameful fear. But Crawford wasn't finished fighting. He pulled a knife from his belt, the blade catching the light like a dangerous smile. I won't let some orphan girl destroy everything I've built, he screamed, lunging toward Clara with the knife raised high. Thomas moved faster than anyone expected, knocking Crawford to the ground before the blade could find its target. The two men wrestled in the dirt, while Clara clutched the journal against her chest, protecting the evidence that would save them all. Jamie surprised everyone by jumping on his father's back, trying to help Thomas. Stop hurting people, Pa. Just stop. Other men in the crowd moved to help, but not to save Crawford. They held him down while Thomas took the knife away. The fight was over as quickly as it had started, leaving Crawford defeated in the mud where he belonged. What happens now? Someone called from the back of the crowd. Clara looked around at all the faces, some ashamed, some angry, some confused. These were her neighbors, the people she had grown up with. They had hurt her family, but they were also the only community she had ever known. Now we decide who we want to be, she said simply. We can keep lying to ourselves, or we can try to make things right. Reverend Morse stepped forward, his face streaked with tears. How can we make things right? How can we fix what we've broken? Thomas stood up, brushing dirt from his clothes. We start by telling the truth, all of it, to everyone. Emily nodded, her young face serious beyond her years. And we make sure this never happens again, to anyone. Clara closed the journal, holding it against her heart. The truth was out now, spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Some people hung their heads in shame. Others looked angry at being fooled for so long. But no one could pretend any more that Clara was the problem. Mrs. Henley tried one last time to control the situation. This is all very dramatic, but what proof do we have that this journal is real? Crawford, still lying in the dirt, laughed bitterly. It's real, you old bat. Every word of it. We've been robbing this town blind for years. The confession hit the crowd like a lightning bolt. People began talking all at once, their voices rising in anger and confusion. But Clara raised her hand for silence, and somehow everyone listened. The proof doesn't matter now, she said quietly. What matters is what we do next. 6 months later, the smell of fresh bread filled the air on a perfect spring morning in 1874. Clara hummed softly as she pulled golden loaves from the oven, each one perfect and warm and ready to feed the people of Millfield. Her hands, once rough from digging through garbage, were now smooth and strong from working with flour and yeast every day. The wedding ring on her finger caught the sunlight streaming through the bakery windows, sparkling like the smile that had become her constant companion. Mrs. Brennan, do you have any of those sweet rolls ready? Emily Henley called from the front of the shop. The young woman had become one of Clara's closest friends, visiting the bakery every morning before school to help with customers and learn about baking. Just finished the last batch, Clara replied, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron. She selected the prettiest roll from the cooling rack and wrapped it in brown paper. "How's your mother doing with the new charity committee?" Emily's face brightened. "Much better. She says organizing real help for families feels better than all those years of just complaining about problems." She paused, then added quietly, "She's still ashamed about how she treated you." "We all are." Clara handed over the sweet roll with a gentle smile. "We can't change the past, but we can make the future better. That's what matters now." Outside the bakery windows, Millfield looked almost the same as it had 6 months ago, but everything important had changed. Jamie Crawford swept the front steps with pride, his young face bright and hopeful in ways it had never been when his father lived in their house. The boy had grown 3 inches since coming to live above the bakery, fed by good food and kindness instead of fear and scraps. Thomas emerged from the storage room, carrying a sack of flour on his strong shoulders. His dark hair was dusted white with powder, and when he saw Clara, his face lit up like sunshine after rain. "What's that secret smile for?" he asked, setting down the flour and moving to wrap his arms around her waist from behind. Clara leaned back against his chest, one hand moving to rest on her still flat belly, where their first child was growing like a tiny seed of hope. "I was thinking about second chances," she said softly. "How sometimes the worst things that happen to us can lead to the best things." Through the window, they watched the morning bustle of their town. Mr. Peterson from the bank walked by, touching his hat respectfully, when he saw Clara through the glass. The new committee he chaired had already returned money to 3 families who had been cheated by Crawford's schemes. Reverend Moore stopped to chat with Mrs. Patterson outside the church, both of them carrying baskets of bread to deliver to families in need. The Reverend had changed the most of anyone, throwing himself into real charity work with the passion of a man trying to earn forgiveness for past sins. "Do you think they'll ever really forgive themselves?" Clara asked, watching the 2 older people hurry toward the poor section of town. Thomas considered the question seriously. "I think they're learning that forgiveness is something you earn through actions, not just words. That's more than most people ever figure out." Jamie burst through the front door, his face flushed with excitement. "Clara! Thomas! You have to see this!" He held up a letter with official, looking writing on fancy paper. "What is it?" Clara asked, taking the letter from his eager hands. "It's from the territorial government in Denver," Jamie explained, bouncing on his toes. "They want to interview you about what happened here. They think other towns might have the same problems with people stealing from the poor." Clara read the letter carefully, her heart beating faster with each line. Officials in Denver had heard about the corruption in Millfield and wanted to use their story to help clean up other communities across Colorado territory. "They want us to come to Denver next month," she told Thomas, her voice filled with wonder. "They want to hear our story and use it to make new laws protecting people who can't protect themselves." Thomas whistled softly. From outcast to expert witness, that's quite a journey. But it was Emily who understood the real meaning of the invitation. "Don't you see? This means what happened here won't happen to other families. Other children won't have to watch their parents die thinking they failed." Clara folded the letter carefully, her eyes bright with unshed tears. 6 months ago, she had been nobody, surviving on scraps and sleeping in an abandoned mill. Now the government wanted her advice on how to protect people like she used to be. "Will you go?" Jamie asked, his voice worried. "Will you come back?" "Of course we'll come back," Thomas said firmly. "This is our home. These are our people, for better and worse." Clara nodded, looking around the bakery that had become her sanctuary and her kingdom. The wooden rolling pin that had been Thomas's mother's sat on the counter, worn smooth by generations of hands making bread with love. The ovens that had seemed magical 6 months ago were now as familiar as her own heartbeat. But it was more than just the building that held her here. It was the community they had all helped to heal, the friendships forged in the fire of truth, the chance to keep making fresh bread for people who had learned to value it properly. "We'll go to Denver," Clara said finally. "We'll tell our story and help other towns. But then we'll come home to Millfield, because this is where we learned that everyone deserves fresh bread, and everyone deserves a second chance." As the sun climbed higher in the Colorado sky, the smell of baking bread spread through the streets like a promise that good things could rise from simple ingredients, that broken people could heal, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories began with the loneliest endings. Clara Brennan smiled and began mixing dough for the afternoon batch, her hands steady and sure, her heart full of tomorrow's possibilities.